Welcome back to Dinar Community Channel. In the stillness of the late hours, when most of Iraq and the world beyond had long settled into the quiet rhythm of the night, an unexpected broadcast shattered the calm. At precisely midnight, Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani appeared on national television, his expression resolute, his tone firm yet charged with a kind of anticipation that could be felt through the screen. It was not a speech that had been announced in advance, nor one that had been leaked to the press. There were no early whispers, no subtle hints. The suddenness of the moment was the first shock. The second came only moments later, when he began to speak of the Iraqi dinar in terms that many had only ever imagined in speculation. For years, the Iraqi dinar had been the subject of fierce debate, countless rumors, and stubborn hopes. Investors across the globe, from small-time currency collectors to financial institutions operating in the shadows, had held on to their IQD with a patience that sometimes felt endless. They had endured cycles of disappointment, contradictory reports, and the constant tug of war between optimism and skepticism. Yet in the span of just a few minutes, Sudani's words cut through the haze of uncertainty with a clarity and authority that left no room for misunderstanding. The revaluation of the Iraqi dinar was no longer a possibility on the horizon, it was a reality that had just been set in motion. The Prime Minister's announcement was direct but layered with significance. He confirmed that the Central Bank of Iraq had completed all required measures, both domestically and internationally, to implement a new exchange rate for the IQD. This was not merely a technical adjustment, it was, in his words, a restoration of Iraq's rightful economic standing, and a correction of an era of undervaluation and dependency. The exact figure he revealed, a rate that placed the dinar at multiple times its previous international value, was met with a collective gasp among those watching live. Screens across Iraq lit up with the news, but the ripple effect extended far beyond the nation's borders. In Europe, Asia, and North America, IQD holders who had been awake or were awakened by alerts scrambled to verify what they were hearing. In private chat rooms, online forums, and encrypted messaging groups, the reaction was explosive. For those who had believed this day would never come, there was disbelief mixed with exhilaration. For those who had trusted every whisper, this was vindication. And for those who had held on quietly, never discussing their holdings for fear of ridicule, the moment felt like a sudden, unexpected victory. Sudani, aware of the immense implications, took time in his address to acknowledge the patience of the Iraqi people and to frame the decision as a turning point not only for the currency but for the nation's broader economic direction. He spoke of sovereignty, financial independence, and the desire to fully integrate Iraq into global trade on fair and balanced terms. The mechanics behind this historic shift had been years in the making. Though the public only saw the final announcement, insiders understood that such a move required meticulous coordination between the Central Bank of Iraq, the Ministry of Finance, international regulatory bodies, and even major foreign banks. The removal of outdated restrictions, the clearing of legacy debts, and the stabilization of Iraq's foreign reserves had all been prerequisites. According to Sudani, these conditions had now been met in full, paving the way for the bold step taken at midnight. What stunned many observers was not only the rate itself but the speed of its implementation. Typically, such monetary policy changes are signaled in advance to allow markets to adjust. Yet this revaluation had been executed in a style reminiscent of surprise geopolitical maneuvers, sudden, decisive, and calculated to prevent speculation from distorting the process. As of the moment the announcement concluded, the new rate was already live in the central bank's internal systems, with banks and exchange outlets instructed to update their rates at opening. International financial platforms, including Forex data feeds, were in the process of reflecting the change, though some lagged by several hours. The reactions within Iraq were immediate and varied. In Baghdad, Basra, Erbil, and beyond, those who held dinars woke up their families to share the news. Currency exchange shops saw early lines forming even before dawn, with people eager to convert small amounts to test the process. Some were cautious, preferring to wait and see if the rate held steady, while others saw the announcement as a once-in-a-lifetime chance to act. In rural towns, where internet connectivity was limited, word spread through phone calls and radio updates, triggering a rush to local banks once doors opened. For the global community of IQD holders, the midnight announcement was like a spark in dry grass, news spread at lightning speed. Private investment groups that had spent years monitoring the situation activated pre-prepared strategies. Some had already arranged appointments with international banks rumored to be participating in IQD exchanges, while others contacted their financial advisors to determine tax implications and long-term planning. In the United States, certain banking institutions confirmed early morning that they had indeed received notice from their central offices to honor the new rates, though appointments and verification protocols would be required for significant transactions. Sudani's speech also addressed the broader economic vision tied to the revaluation. He outlined infrastructure projects, industrial investments, and trade agreements that would be supported by the strengthened currency. The intention, he made clear, was not merely to enrich currency holders but to empower Iraq to fund its own growth without excessive reliance on foreign aid or debt. This framing was deliberate, aimed at ensuring both domestic and international audiences understood that the revaluation was a tool for nation building, not just a financial windfall. Economic analysts, while surprised by the timing, noted that the move could be a strategic masterstroke. By revaluing during a period of relative political stability and rising oil revenues, Iraq was positioning itself to leverage its natural resources while attracting foreign direct investment. The stronger dinar would make imports more affordable, potentially reducing inflationary pressures on everyday goods. However, experts also warned of the challenges ahead, particularly the risk of speculative bubbles and the need for robust monetary policy to maintain stability. As dawn broke over Baghdad, television networks replayed Sudani's address in full, interspersed with interviews from citizens, economists, and government officials. The mood was electric, yet underpinned by a sense of cautious optimism. Many recalled previous moments in Iraq's recent history when great promises had been followed by disappointment. This time, however, the tangible shift in the exchange rate lent a credibility that no amount of rhetoric could provide. In foreign capitals, the news prompted swift discussions. Governments with economic ties to Iraq began assessing the implications for trade balances and contractual agreements. Companies involved in infrastructure, energy, and construction saw potential opportunities expand overnight. Even in regions where the IQD had been little more than a speculative curiosity, financial institutions were now facing inquiries from clients eager to know how and where they could exchange their holdings. For the average Iraqi, the immediate question was more personal: how would this change their daily lives? In the short term, those with savings in dinars found themselves with increased purchasing power. Families who had been saving for education, housing, or medical expenses suddenly saw their plans within closer reach. For wage earners, there was hope that salaries would stretch further, though this would depend on how quickly the domestic market adjusted to the new rate. There were also emotional dimensions to the announcement. For many, the revaluation was more than an economic event; it was a symbolic restoration of dignity after years of hardship and undervaluation. Older Iraqis remembered a time when the dinar was among the most respected currencies in the region, and the midnight announcement felt like a step back toward that legacy. For younger generations, it was an introduction to a more empowered national identity, one in which Iraq could negotiate on equal footing with global partners. In the hours following the announcement, speculation turned to what would happen next. Would the dinar's value continue to rise in the open market? Would Iraq introduce further reforms to modernize its banking sector? Sudani hinted at upcoming legislative measures designed to protect the currency's stability, including stricter oversight of foreign exchange transactions and incentives for Iraqis to keep their wealth in local banks rather than moving it abroad. He also mentioned the government's intention to invest in technology, agriculture, and manufacturing, sectors that could diversify Iraq's economy beyond oil. In some circles, the discussion shifted to geopolitical implications. A stronger, more independent Iraq could alter dynamics in the Middle East, particularly in trade relations and regional alliances. Nations that had long viewed Iraq primarily as an oil supplier might now see it as a broader economic partner. The timing of the revaluation, unannounced and executed in the dead of night, was interpreted by some as a deliberate assertion of sovereignty, signaling that Iraq would act in its own interests without seeking approval from external powers. The human stories emerging from that night were as compelling as the economic ones. There was the retired teacher in Najaf who had quietly accumulated dinars over the years, now able to fully fund her grandchildren's education. The small business owner in Mosul who could finally afford to expand his operations and hire more workers. The young couple in Basra who saw their dream of owning a home move from distant hope to immediate possibility. These individual transformations, multiplied across the country, hinted at the deeper impact of Sudani's midnight decision. And yet, amid the euphoria, there were notes of caution. Economists reminded the public that while a revaluation can bring sudden benefits, it also requires disciplined fiscal management to ensure those gains are not eroded. Inflation control, prudent government spending, and continued economic diversification would be essential. Sudani himself acknowledged these challenges, urging citizens to see the event not as an endpoint but as the beginning of a new chapter in Iraq's economic story. By the time the sun fully rose, the initial shock had given way to a frenetic energy across financial markets, government offices, and everyday households. Social media platforms were flooded with screenshots of updated exchange rates, personal testimonies, and endless debates about the future trajectory of the dinar. In cafes and marketplaces, conversations that might once have centered on politics or football were now dominated by currency valuations and investment opportunities. The midnight announcement would go down as one of the most consequential moments in Iraq's modern economic history. It was a calculated gamble that blended economic strategy with political theater, designed to catch both markets and observers off guard. For IQD holders around the world, it was the moment they had been waiting for, sometimes for decades. For the Iraqi people, it was a declaration that their country's economic destiny was firmly back in their own hands. As the first day under the new rate unfolded, one truth became clear: the shockwave from Sudani's words would continue to reverberate, reshaping not only financial portfolios but the collective imagination of what Iraq could be. And somewhere in the back of every IQD holder's mind, the memory of that midnight broadcast, the suddenness, the gravity, the sheer improbability, would remain etched as the night when speculation gave way to reality and a long-held dream finally stepped into the light. Like and subscribe for more videos.